This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week, 2 bits of a byte funneled through a layer of cryptography I will never understand. Tia Vasiliou.
Hello.
And our very special guest for this episode, Henry Barajas.
Good to be back.
Henry, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Could you tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself before we get too deep into this episode?
Yeah, my name is Henry Barajas. I am from Tucson, Arizona, and I write comics. Wrote the most recent thing, Helm Greycastle, with a bunch of amazing people. Brian Valenza, Ramat Handoko, Claire Napier, Gabrielle Downey, that had some amazing role-playing games, one-shot RPG games by Tristan J. Tarwater and Jeffrey Golden, with art by Jen Vaughn. And you might know me from my comic La Voz de Mayo Thought the Rambo that was featured here by Tia, and that's about my great-grandfather, who was a World War II veteran and a political activist that helped one of the last Native American tribes gain federal recognition. I am currently the sales manager at Oni Press. That's me. That's all I want you to know about. Nothing else.
All right. Well, we won't dive any further, I guess. Oh my gosh.
Busy guy.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're really excited to have you back. I guess before we get too deep into things and I ask those legally mandated questions that I have on every episode, I got 2 things to announce. I want to shout out some of our latest Patreon members, Peter and Thundercat666. Thank you guys so much for joining recently. We hope that you're enjoying all of the exclusive Patreon series like Giant Days of Our Lives, a read-along series for the series Giant Days, Saga of Saga, a read-along series for the series Saga, the IRCB Movie Club, where Paul, Brian, and myself, watch movies every 3 months. Fantastic stuff. There's so much out there. We're really excited to have you guys as well. One other thing I will say, kind of in that same vein, is that we have a very, very special announcement about our next Patreon series. It's our biggest series yet. It is unbelievable, the scope and scale that this next thing is, and I don't want to spoil it, so make sure you listen to next week's episode, our big annual 7th annual episode. It's going to be a monster. I'm very excited. It's going to be me, Paul, Kara, Nick. We're talking about all sorts of things, but get ready for that big announcement next week as well. So let's get into talking about comic books. I have 2 legally mandated questions, like I said, that I have to ask for every single episode. That is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Tia.
Hi, I've been okay. I would like to quickly give a quick pool party update to our Discord listeners. There's currently a pool party that my neighbors are having. One of my neighbors is a bigger, crazy cat lady than I am, and she has just joined the pool party with her 2 cats.
Are the cats swimming?
They do not appear to be yet, but I would not put it past her.
Oh, you can watch this happening.
Yeah, it's just outside my window. I can see it happening.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe one day I can aspire to that level of crazy cat lady, but my current cat Holiday despises all other living things and being on her harness. So I don't know. We'll see.
One day you'll build up to getting Holiday to go swimming. I'm very excited to see that video.
Maybe. So anyway, how have comics been? Comics have been okay. I recently read a book called The Science of Surfing, A Surfside Girl's Guide to the Ocean by Kim Dwinnell, which is a top shelf IDW book. And it is a very sweet all ages book. It goes into the science of the ocean, waves, tides, all that sort of thing. There's 2 other books in the series, and I think they're fiction books, like 2 little girls, kind of Nancy Drew, but like with a surfer setting. And so the 2 little girls are the same characters in all 3 books, and so they kind of narrate the science and the factoids in this one. And apparently, there's also going to be an Apple TV Plus series, so that's cool. But yeah, anyone who's interested in surfing, science, marine biology, it's a really cute book. There's like really good illustrations that make all the scientific concepts very understandable, very clear. Things like waves are energy that move the water molecules, and how tides are affected by the moon, and how the surface weather creates energy that like affects the waves and it hits the ocean floor to make swells. And there's also a section on like seabirds, tide pools, ocean creatures, the terrifying mystery that is dolphins. I just learned, not from this book, because then it would not be all ages, but I just learned that there's like a lot of lesbian dolphins, and they have like a developed clitoris, and they just like have sex for pleasure, which is awesome. Like, get it, dolphins. Yeah. But anyway, that would not be appropriate for this book, and it was not included. And it also breaks down surfing, right? Like, some people know when I moved back to California, I took up surfing. It's really fun. It's really hard work. And so the book talks about like, what does it mean to be goofy footed, which I am, and how to paddle and get used to the movement and popping up and all of that. I'm terrible at paddling, but pretty good at popping up. And so yeah, it was a super cute book. I have 2 critiques, and I feel like they're kind of significant ones. Mm-hmm. One is that the 2 little girls who narrate the book are both drawn absolutely rail thin. And now this book isn't drawn in like a hyper realistic way. It's drawn in a children's book illustration way. And so I understand that style. It's very economical. It's uncluttered, especially when you're doing like, you know, scientific concepts. It's very simple and kind of clear cut. But I hate that automatically means that the figures have to be really angular, especially as a little girl who was not myself a rail thin, angular little girl. It's so hard to constantly see little girls portrayed that way. It makes you feel like you're not allowed to be a little girl anymore, because like childhood freedom is somehow a characteristic of being really thin. And so that was kind of like frustrating. And then another thing that is really frustrating for me is that, and I feel like I'm kind of maybe veering out of my lane a little here, so I'm going to speak very carefully. Mm-hmm. But like, Polynesian people invented surfing like 1,000 years ago. And we know this because there are like paintings from 1,000 years ago that show them surfing. Like, they could have even invented it sooner, you know? But anyway, like, there's a strong visual component to the origin of surfing and its roots in indigenous Polynesian people. And you're like making a graphic novel, so why wouldn't you touch on that? You know, like, it's well within the scope of this book, and it feels like a really big omission. And then like kind of going back to my other critique, especially since there's 2 narrators, like one of them couldn't have been specifically depicted as Polynesian, because like both of the girls are like sort of racially ambiguous. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could make one in your mind Polynesian. Mm-hmm. But that really feels like a cop-out to me. I really would have loved to see one of the girls like be specifically called out visually as Polynesian. Right. And the author says the 2 little girls are created after her and her best friend as children. And I totally get that. But like, the author is a blonde white lady from San Diego, and this isn't an autobio like book. It's a fiction book. And this one particularly is also like a science book. And so, I mean, white ladies, come on, like, we can do better. We can think outside of ourselves, especially when we're touching on something that doesn't really belong to white people. And it just seems like a really big oversight. Also, there's a whole section in the book on conservation and like marine conservation, which she doesn't even talk about Indigenous Pacific Islander-led conservation. And that's like a pretty big component of that. So I don't know. There's these glaring omissions that I would... You
said it was out through Top Shelf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of...
Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah.
About white? The other
well,
thing...
it's interesting looking at this book. It came out in what, 2000? It came out in 2021. I figure with
December,
like Moana being a thing for the last however many years, like it's like clear that there is a want and need for to tell those types of tales, like with the people who would originate that story, at least to touch on it, you know, to go into the history of it. So yeah, that's kind of surprising.
And like, you know, it's the same little girls from the series, and it first came out in 2017, but still, like, I just don't think that is any excuse anymore. Which isn't to say that it isn't still like a really good science book, but like, you know, I think that we need to stop saying like, oh, it's fine, except for it like erases, you know, this really important like Indigenous role in surfing, or in, you know, you just like, we can't do that anymore.
No, that's true. You're right. I mean, unless you don't care, and that's
Unless you
kind
don't
of what's
care.
been happening. And,
Right.
I'm sure whoever wrote this book wasn't educated themselves.
Probably
So it's
not. Like
just a
I've read it.
long history of people just passing down this like very privileged thing.
Yes, she's she grew up on the beach. I've read interviews with her talking about it. Like she's very sincere. She loves the ocean. She loves surfing. She grew up at the beach, so like I get it. But like I said, like white ladies, we have to think outside of ourselves. We can do better. And like speaking of that, I'll also just mention that this weekend there was an underwater volcano that erupted in the Pacific island nation of Tonga, and they are facing communication disruptions, water contamination, volcanic ash in the air. There's flooding, and no deaths have been reported, but that could also be because there's the communication disruption. And either way, it's still a really scary natural disaster. Like I live across the street from the beach in Southern California. We're under a tsunami warning.
Yeah. That was not on my 2022 Omicron bingo card.
Yeah. So it was a coincidence that I read this book and then that happened, but it seemed worth mentioning.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, Henry, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been? Have you read anything interesting recently?
Yeah, I've been great. I haven't been public with this, but I did contract the coronavirus to steal Magic Johnson's. Never mind. Yeah, no, I got COVID during the holidays, so I've been quarantined a lot, and that was not what I wanted to do. I was really excited to go to Tucson, where I'm from, and be social and see people I haven't seen in a long time, and I somehow got it, and I did the right thing and just closed myself off from the world. But I did a lot of cycling while I was in Tucson, and my sister was very adamant that we went cycling, which I'm glad we did because I had a good time. But, I had coronavirus, and I'm sure she got it, but she didn't care. So while I was sick, I was able to, do a lot of cycling. And there's this trail in Tucson called the Loop. And as I was going forward, I could see this bobcat like climb out of the desert onto the trail.
What?
Yeah, and I don't know if you haven't seen a bobcat, please Google it. They sit on cacti, like they're like amazing, beautiful, majestic creatures, and it sat in the middle of the road looking at my sister and I. And like if she wasn't there because I turned around, she was scared out of her mind, like she was gonna turn around. But I like would have gone up to it because it looked like like it was so nice, but it could have like tore me to pieces if it wanted. Like it's not like Holiday, which probably could tear me to pieces. I mean, yeah.
She certainly likes to think she could.
So that was really cool. But yeah, I got to quarantine in my best friend's like mom's apartment, and so I was really lucky that I was still able to like self-isolate in Arizona and not leave the area. So I watched a lot of TV. I watched The Leftovers. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but that was a really good show. Real big. I'm watching the show like 20 years later. So, but
is that the show where like a certain percentage of like the people disappear in the world and everyone just has to deal with it or something?
Yeah, that's kind of like what's happening now. But it's really amazing. But so on my way to Tucson, I stopped at this really cool comic shop called Ash Ave, and I picked up some like really old comics, and one of them was Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth, number 2, which is a huge like deal for me because I got to do something recently that like involves Kirby, and I'm really, really honored, and I can't wait to talk about it. But I did get to write the Avengers, so I've just been super grateful of Jack Kirby in my life, who's like dead and I've never talked to, but I feel like, his like work has been able to get me paid in ways that like I'm really grateful for. And so yeah, I got to read that, and since I work at Oni Press, I have to go back into like and just read everything. So I've been reading a lot of Scott Pilgrim again, and I feel like I'm 16 years old when I read that comic, which I was when I saw it and read it, and it's like a fun like revisiting of your youth. And there's some really cool comics coming out, like Dirtbag Rapture. I don't know if anyone's read that book. But
Oh man, I cannot get enough of that book. I don't
yeah,
like it's such a like strange concept that I constantly have questions about, and I love it. Yeah, totally
yeah,
love that book.
yeah. I don't know if something's dead or dying in it, I pretty much buy it. So that's kind of. But
Fair enough.
I'm writing a new book, and it's nonfiction again, and it's a true crime, and I'm currently reading this prose, Indecent Advances by James Polchin.
Hmm.
It's this interesting queer history about how when there was that gay men were cornered and beaten and killed, and the way the media would report it was as a mystery, and how they really sold how devious it was. And so it's kind of the birth of true crime, because that's what they were writing in the papers, and people were following these narratives. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's an interesting book. So if you're interested in why we are fascinated by um true crime, it's because the press would write about how indecent it was, and how cruel and deviant and criminal, and it's pretty messed up. So yeah, that's, if
Yeah,
anyone's into books, you check that out.
gotcha. Yeah, what was the name of that again? I'll make sure to jot that down and put it in our
Indecent
notes.
Advances: A Hidden History of True Crime and Prejudice Before Stonewall.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was it's pretty
Yeah,
grim
real
stuff.
uplifting stuff.
I was gonna say. Well, geez. Well, I guess for me, I have been like heads down in all sorts of weird books recently. Like I've been trying to dig through some of the old just graphic novels I've bought in different sales and stuff. I will say, I guess before I talk about comics, I am currently in the process of changing jobs, so I found a new job somewhere else
Congrats.
outside of Amazon. Yeah, thank you so much. And so I will be moving over to another new company in the near future. But because of that, I've been massively stressed, and because leaving a job can be extremely complicated sometimes. And so I've just been reading a lot of things that have been giving me a lot of comfort and have been really I guess easy to read.
That's
And
awesome.
so I read this book called Gert in the Sacred Stones. This is a Italian or French translated book. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's written by Marco Rocci, illustrated by Francesca Carita, and translated by Jamie Richards. And I don't know what it is about this book. This is published by Dark Horse, but it's a story about lizard people and humans, and how they're fighting against each other because of this ancient god thing. And it's it's a YA book, and the whole book is kind of premised on this idea of this young girl who wants to basically get revenge for her parents getting killed. And kind of the story of the book is sometimes you don't need to get revenge to feel justified and find justice. And it's a really positive story, I think, to try to tell the kids, because it's very in your face, these people die, and this little girl is very upset. And so in any typical action movie, you'd see someone just go off and I'm gonna kill those people who killed my family. But by the end of the book, you find that there's actually a lot more going on, and the story is extremely complex, but also told in a very straightforward way. And I found it to be super enjoyable. So I'd really recommend that if you're looking for a YA book that has a good message, really interesting world building, the art's really fun. And yeah, I was really surprised by the overall message of it at the end, because like I said, I feel like you can kind of plot out the course of a story like that, and this really surprised me in how it ended itself. The other book that I've been reading recently is Superman, Son of Kal-El, number 1 through 6. This is Tom Taylor, John Timms. I think everybody in their sibling has been talking about this book in some capacity, whether it's positive or negative. But someone I know who's on, I guess, on the other show that I produce called The Great Pop Culture Debate. If you haven't heard of it, you should check it out if you want to hear a bunch of people argue about pop culture in a really funny, comedic way. He recommended, his name's Bob, he recommended this book to me, and I bought number 1, and I fell in love with it immediately. The story of Superman's son, Jonathan, basically becoming the new Superman of Earth, and being a bit more just modern about things. Superman's whole thing is, I need to protect everyone, but he always takes a step back, and he always lets superheroes go or supervillains go, whereas Jonathan's like, no, I'm going to be a different Superman. I'm actually going to take action. I'm going to get into the middle of things that are ethically wrong and say, you know what, you can't do that because I'm the most powerful person on the planet and I'm trying to do what's right by the people.
Oh, wow.
It's really like Tom Taylor is like, I don't know how to describe this. Tom Taylor is like Mark Millar without all of the violence and like misogyny that ends up in a lot of his books.
Whoa,
So like there's a really I don't know. I like Mark Millar's books, but I think like Tom Taylor really gets how to tell a punchy cinematic story without being offensive. And he doesn't pull his punches when he's trying to actually get a message across, when he wants to say like someone's doing something bigoted in the public world that we live in. He'll make a great obvious homage to it in his comics. Like he did it in his Suicide Squad run. He's doing it in this book. And it's been really great. And this is the book that everyone I think has been screaming about, like, oh, Superman's got a boyfriend. Like, if you read the book, it all makes sense. And I don't know why anyone would be upset by a single fucking page or a panel on a page. So it's so good. And John Timms' art really captures everything that, in my opinion, makes Big Two Comics work. Lots of action, rippling muscles, drama in every single panel. Everything about it is just kinetic and very vibrant, and it makes for an overall just pleasant reading experience. I flew through the first 5 issues of this. I'm so excited for the 7th issue to come out, I think next week or this week. Man, it's amazing. It's a great book. Hands down, probably one of the best Big Two books that I'm reading right now. It may not be everyone's cup of tea. This isn't like an Immortal Hulk type of situation where this is like an epic thing that's going to change the comics landscape for a character, but I think this is a really, really solid book.
I mean, he's like building a character.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what's beautiful about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I mean, Danny in the chat saying Damian Wayne is his best friend is very fun.
I mean, they're the same age and they like teamed up together. They have a history.
Yeah.
No, it's a really cool, like, I'm really grateful for these, characters getting refreshed in such a like true way.
Yeah, I really think this is going to make like a great collected edition, like to gift to someone. Like if I know any teenaged person that wants to get into Big Two Comics, this is like a go-to book, I think, for me.
Yeah,
definitely think that would work better than Justice League or anything Brian Michael Bendis is writing. Like. Yeah. Anyways, the last thing I'll say, have you guys heard of this Usagi Yojimbo book?
Yeah,
it's
of course.
Really low key. It's like it's pretty slept on. No,
I mean,
I've been I'm kidding. This is like probably one of the most popular comics in forever. But I just started getting really into it, and I'm reading through the Fantagraphics volumes, and I fucking love this series. What have I been doing? Not reading this book for so many years.
Gorgeous, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Anyways, I've been reading that. That's been great. But let's move on. Let's talk about comics that we're looking forward to reading. Everyone's got picks. So I guess Tia, let's go to you. What are you excited for?
Yeah, Tia.
On the top of your pile.
What's on top of your pile?
So there are a lot of disability advocates pointing out that the official COVID policy of the US government at this point is basically human sacrifice to keep the economy going, like literally blood sacrifice.
That's true.
So I really feel like maybe giving a reread to Jonathan Hickman and Tom Coker's Black Monday Murders.
Oh, I love that book.
Which I had actually read the first volume like when it came out in 2017, and I didn't realize that the second volume ever came out, because I was like, this is really complicated and I'm going to trade wait the second volume, and then I just forgot because I am bad person, but
no, you're not. You're just a busy person, and sometimes these things slip through the cracks. Like, it's true.
Massive delays on a comic doesn't help either, but yeah.
Well, I mean, it's so intricate, and also I'm pretty sure I've said this before. Jonathan Hickman knows exactly when and how the world is going to end. So maybe I think the delays were probably that like he just was still like receiving the transmission.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling if I read Black Monday Murders, like I'll know what's happening next. And I also I don't want to just ambiguously say I'm listening to these many disability advocates. I'm going to specifically name check Imani Barbarin on Twitter and TikTok. She is an incredible advocate for the disability like not just people who are currently disabled, but she's also been really sounding the alarm on COVID as a mass disabling event. If you've heard that phrase, I'm pretty sure she is the first person who said it.
Oh wow.
Yes.
And so she's been talking a lot about what we should expect and how we can help people in the future. Like she is really doing the work, and she created a hashtag My Disabled Life is Worthy in response to the CDC director's like horrific eugenics comments. And that hashtag actually did spark like people, the CDC has met with disability advocacy groups, and like, you know, there's been a lot of media attention. So it's not just reminding me that Black Monday Murders has a second volume. Like, if this is something you're interested in, definitely look for Imani Barbarin on the internet.
Yeah, I love her content. Yeah. Henry, what about you? Are you reading anything that's either coming out soon or something you're pulling off your shelf that you've been meaning to read for a little while?
I'm very lucky that I get to read a lot of comics for free. And like, I don't know, like when you work in publishing, I think Tia can agree that you're like thinking about 2022 in July.
Yeah.
You know? And you're like,
right.
So you're like kind of reading the future of comics, which is fun, you know? There's this there's a lot of cool stuff coming out, like Agents of Slam, Chef's Kiss by Jarrett Melendez. There's a lot of cool, like I mean, the Rick and Morty Dune comic is coming out, and I got to like help make a bunch of like cool covers for that, for like some specific retailers. So that's coming out on the first week of February. Sina Grace has a new comic coming out.
The
Rockstar and Softboy. Yeah. Sina's been like a really good friend to me for a long time, and just like someone who's been very encouraging, even though I sucked, and like, you know, like as like a comic book writer or just as some, you know, like it was just, he's always been a really cool dude. And I hope people check that book out, because he's like, he just rolls with the times, and I'm happy to see him like continuing to do creator own stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm always a fan like of checking out their, like his newest stuff. Like it's always something interesting, like to say the least. That's
definitely
very excited for that book. Well, I guess we got a handful of folks hanging out with us in the Discord today, so I'm going to read off some of their picks. Matt is reading She-Hulk #1. Stephanie's looking forward to reading Criminal Volume 2 and Dawn of X Volume 3. That is a pair. That's a pair of comics right there. Danny's looking forward to Batman the Knight #1. Nick is looking forward to Silver Coin #8. And for me, my next book is not going to be a new book, but something I picked up this weekend. I happened to be in New York in Manhattan cleaning off my desk. So I decided to swing over to, Kinokuniya. And I grabbed Lupin the Third Greatest Hits by Monkey Punch, which is like a collected edition of all of some of the greatest capers of Lupin the Third. And since I've never read any Lupin the Third or watched any of the anime, I've only just heard like good things. I was like, let's try this. So I've got this nice hardcover that I picked up from there. And I'm very excited to read that. So it's sitting on my shelf and it's just staring me down. It looks a beautiful, beautiful book. So I'm really excited to read that thing. I guess one more thing before we go to the break, I want to remind everybody that if you haven't already, we want you to go fill out the annual IRCB listener survey. You can go to bit.ly/IRCB2022, IRCB2022. That's the URL at the end. You can be entered to win a $25 gift card to Comixology or Midtown Comics, or really even your local comic shop if you want. If you're a winner, we'll let you know next week. We're going to announce winners on the show as part of the annual, but go fill that out. Helps us make the show better, helps us know what you want to see from the show moving forward, what you like, what you don't like, other things on Patreon, our Discord, all that stuff. We got a ton of questions that you can optionally fill out. But yeah, we really want to hear from you. So go do that, bit.ly/IRCB2022. Look for the link in the show notes as well. But yeah, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're talking about the biggest thing on this show ever. I've written so many notes. We're talking about NFTs, the problems with them, Kickstarter, moving to the blockchain, a whole bunch of stuff. I'm real excited. So we'll be back in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we're talking about probably a very hotly debated topic. I mean, I think it's been in the zeitgeist of the comics world, the internet world for couple of years now. But specifically, we're going to be talking about the problem with NFTs, Kickstarter moving to the blockchain, and essentially giving you guys at home our thoughts from I Read Comic Books about how we feel about NFTs. And so we brought Henry and Tia here to talk about this. So I guess to get things started, I'm going to go through kind of just a high level of what an NFT is for those at home, those of you at home who haven't maybe looked as deep into this as maybe I have, and Henry and Tia as well. So NFT stands for non-fungible token, aka a unique ownership record of something in the blockchain. If you're really curious about what the intricacies of a lot of that are, you should go to a page that we have, pages.ircbpodcast.com. We have a sub page called NFT Shit List that has a lot of explainers about essentially what NFTs are, how they work in the blockchain, how the blockchain works. It goes into a lot of details about that. But essentially what this is, you as a person can put money into the blockchain. You can purchase what's called cryptocurrency. And you can then have ownership of like this hash number, this digital number, this number that represents a value. And that value can then be used to purchase a receipt to claim ownership over something, such as an image or a video or really anything, right? It's a pretty novel idea on paper. The idea that you could own a digital thing seems pretty interesting. And I think when someone says that to you, you go, oh, snap, I want to get in on that. But essentially, this is just a receipt. It's just an ownership record, right? It's a token that's linked to a digital and sometimes physical content, providing proof of ownership, like I said. So you get a receipt of ownership for a thing. That ownership record gets equated to a value based on speculation, inflation, hype, and all the same reasons why folks want to own a rare physical good. And because these receipts are unique, they represent a scarce resource. But ultimately, they are, when you own that receipt, it gets perpetuated out into the decentralized blockchain that exists wherever you purchased it. If you bought it with Ethereum, or you bought it with Bitcoin, or you bought it with Sand, or you bought it with Dogecoin, whatever you bought this thing with, whatever cryptocurrency you used, the record of that transaction gets placed into the blockchain. The unique record of an ownership and identification gets placed into the blockchain so that everything can get traced back to who actually owns this thing. The thing that makes this so interesting to a lot of people is that the proof of ownership cannot be faked, because in order for someone to do that, they would have to modify every record on this decentralized database. So long and short, there is a bit of like security in this. The problem is it comes down to the question of, can you truly own like a digital good, and what does it mean for someone to create an NFT, which is what's called like minting? And there's a lot of problems with that factor in environmental issues. When you mint something, it creates a lot of carbon emissions because of the electricity that's required in order to make sure that those transactions happen, pump out all the data, as well as what mining new tokens come down to. There's a lot of information to this. And I'm going to continue rambling unless someone stops me. So, Tia, Henry, what are your thoughts on this? I guess, what is your background on this, and why do we have a problem with this? Because I've got pages of notes, but I want to hear your thoughts before I get into them.
I think the problem is these kids don't know that we could have done this. Like we've been doing this. Like I've been buying things and owning things online since I was old enough to get on the internet. Now just someone found a way to make money off that,
Definitely.
It's really weird.
Definitely.
I think that anything that could believably have been a storyline for Russ Hanneman coming up with a way to make more money after drinking too much of his tres leches. I'm my brain dead right now. His just tres camas tequila. Like when Silicon Valley feels like a documentary, it's time to reevaluate. Like it just kind of feels like we've surpassed satire. Like what Henry said, like what's really novel about this is that there's people making money from it in a new way, and you always have to follow the money, and it usually doesn't ever point you to anything good.
Right. There is something that is inherently broken in this entire process of NFT minting and inflation and pricing and all this other stuff, right? So you take this idea of, say I want to sell a picture that I drew on my iPad to somebody, and they want to be the person that says, I own this thing. Like I have this unique record that says that I own this thing. Problem is, when I put that thing on the internet, I have to pay for the cost, or I have to upfront the costs for minting the token based on the image size and the essentially unique hex value or unique value that gets generated based on saying, okay, here's the image, here's the exact cryptonomical representation of this image that gets put in the blockchain. Here is the proof that created this this unique identifier. Someone can buy access to that, and then we have to put into the database, like, here's someone's proof of ownership at any time they make a transaction to buy it or sell it or do whatever with it, relist it somewhere. All of these things take time and energy, and more so than other electronic transactions, if only because the receipt building and the number crunching that needs to be done in order to support this entire database mechanism to generate all these hashes and process these things to make sure that, oh yes, this cryptonomically can be processed, and yes, this person, when they made the transaction, that's the actual value that we're trying to process itself. A ton of math needs to be done on graphical processing units, right? You probably hear about folks buying GPUs and then plugging them into server farms and stuff. That's all done to not only mine new values in the Ethereum blockchain or Bitcoin blockchain or whatever, to take a little bit of profit off of that, but also to process the validation side of any transaction that happens as you get updates to the decentralized database. It's so crazy how complicated this is just to prove ownership records. And again, there is like a security level that is totally valid, but the offset of that, of the energy uses, is just not there. And to Henry's point, like, we've been doing this for years. You buy copies of games from Steam all the time, or you get little unique identifiers from Steam that say, oh, you got this trading card thing and it's worth 7 cents or something on the Steam market. But we've been doing this for years. The difference is that it's not decentralized and one company owns it. But I don't know, folks are claiming that NFTs are like the future, when buying copies of unique images and stuff is pretty tough, because at the end of the day, digital assets are inherently not unique to the benefit of everybody. I don't know. I'm pulling my hair out over here just thinking about this thing. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that is the really interesting aspect of it, and I say interesting with a lot of contempt. The concept of authenticity in this entire thing is a performance for other people that in a way kind of undermines itself.
Yeah it does. This is a very complex thing to discuss. I don't think people understand how complex this is. There's just a lot of moral questions you have to ask when you enter this space. I mean, I'm going to be frank, somebody offered me $10,000 to write a single comic for a Bitcoin company.
Huh.
And I don't know if you know how much a comic book writer makes in comics. $10,000 for a single issue is a lot of money for what would be a couple, however long it would take you to write a script. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was very tempted. And the people that are for this are artists, because you're finding opportunities that pay more money than I've ever been offered to do comics, and I have to pay myself. I use Kickstarter, which is one of the biggest things that's impacting me, is Kickstarter's name is not what it used to be because of this. Mm-hmm. And that's how I made my money. And I'd be lucky if I were to make $10,000 on a project. So the people that are for this are benefiting, that I think, artists. And that's what I've noticed the most, is people who are making a lot of money drawing and selling their artwork. And I think that is kind of why it's still around, because, there are people benefiting just from the same people that are benefiting are also losing.
I think, yeah, it's unsustainable by nature, because any solution that leaves behind the vulnerable is just feeding the cycle and really hastening its inevitable collapse. Just because you found a way personally to climb some people to get a little higher on the food chain, I just, eventually when it collapses at the bottom, it's going to take you with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that really bothers me about this is there are these one-off cases or handfuls of cases of people saying like, oh, I sold this thing for $50,000, in Ethereum, right? Or making a lot of money in one or two or a handful of different pieces, which encourages hundreds or thousands of other artists to say, hey, maybe I can make $50,000, right? It's like a money-making scheme of, oh, one person hit the lottery, so I might as well play the lottery every day, right? The difference between playing the lottery every day and creating an NFT is that the ramifications of creating a single NFT are so detrimental in comparison to buying a single lottery ticket.
I feel like it's sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I feel like it's like LuLaRoe leggings for Joe Rogan enthusiasts.
I mean, it kind of is, right?
Like it's an MLM is what it is.
So here's the thing. It doesn't follow like a traditional MLM structure, but it feels the exact same, right? You get to hear these stories about one-off people making a ton of money, right? Like the thing that fucking broke my brain was hearing that Steve Aoki and Todd McFarlane created an NFT or in the process of creating some sort of Spawn NFT. And who's going to benefit from that? It's fucking Todd McFarlane and Steve Aoki, because like they're the ones at the top. The people who are buying this shit aren't actually going to benefit, because at the end of the day, the only reason these things have value is because they're inflated by other people. And the whole process of making NFTs and selling them is to just find the next person who's you can dupe into paying a little bit more than
that
you.
Is the comic book industry in a nutshell.
It's fucking ridiculous.
It is the comic book industry in a nutshell. People are buying variant covers so they can get CGC'd, so they can sell for more money. This is a collector's thing. And that's why I am very confident this is not going away, and this is only going to become bigger and bigger. Because it is capitalism. And here's our chance to get rid of capitalism in a certain way. Are you going to be for it or against it? Because eventually you just get eaten up by it, and there's nothing you can do. And you have to use Venmo and Dogecoin. And now people are getting their taxes are being, Venmo and all these companies are releasing tax information because, there's no way for this to not work. That's just what I'm afraid of. And that's what is happening. Yeah. And given what we know about this certain style of, financial sustainability, here's our chance to maybe kill it. But if not, I don't know.
There's a great quote from Stardust, which of course was written by the anti-Todd McFarlane, Neil Gaiman. Yeah. And he says, when I was very young, somebody, maybe it was a squirrel, they talk so much, or a magpie, or maybe a fishy, told me that Pan owned all this forest. Well, not owned, not like he would sell the forest to someone else or put a wall around it. It's not hard to own something or everything. You just have to know it's yours and then be willing to let it go. To me, that gets to the heart of this, which is that it is not about the thing. It is about the performance of ownership, which is white supremacy. The end.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
I was going to say, this is, it's so funny to see this all come back to that.
Capitalism is patriarchal white supremacy. And
absolutely.
That is you can't boil it down, and that's where the buck stops.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it is, I don't know. It's just that the thing that is the most frustrating part of me is the thing, the point that I think I just made a minute ago is the whole point of it is duping people, right? Yeah, it's tricking them into spending their money. And the person who ends up on top is usually someone who has an insider, or they are one of the many reports that I've seen on NFTs. And again, I'm sure some NFT bro could come back at me about this, but there have been multiple claims of people creating separate Ethereum wallets to just pump up the price of their NFT on OpenSea or wherever you buy NFTs, just for the sake of saying, oh no, this thing spiked, it must be worth something, and people are buying it just for the speculation side of it, right?
And that is comics.
Mm-hmm. And that is this whole thing that's all just trying to dupe people out of money so that one person can end up on top. And capitalism in a nutshell, white supremacy in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. It's publishing. It's I mean, that's what you're basically doing is can I get you to buy this book instead of that?
Yeah.
And part of me really wonders if this is specifically happening now because publishing, especially comic books, is starting to be more inclusive. People are starting to ask for ways that we can disrupt this like vicious capitalist cycle, make more room for other people. And this just to me reeks of the old guard bros taking their dolls, which that's what we're going to call them, their GI Joe dolls, and going home and like shifting the goalposts. But really, and they think that they're solving a problem for everyone, but they're taking the problems with them that affect the vulnerable, and they're basically just putting it on a top shelf so nobody can do anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's rich people, it's folks with a lot of money saying, hey, here's a new way for you to also be rich like me, wink, wink. And it's just them stealing a little bit more off the top, I mean, and this isn't even to mention the amount of piracy and stealing of art that's happening right now, right?
Yes.
Like, what is it? RJ Palmer, I think is their name. Like, they made a ton of art has been stolen from them off of Twitter and turned into NFTs without their permission, and people are making money off of it. Right?
I know someone who tweeted a joke about the Kardashians, and the Kardashians turned her tweet into an NFT.
That is
what the I mean, sure, it's absurd because there's this thing that I think everybody in the Western society, at least in the United States, right, loves to cling to, and we also hate it at the same time, which is copyright and ownership, right?
Yeah.
We want to be able to argue, oh well, this is my thing, I created it, therefore. But like the NFT folks don't seem to care about that. They don't seem to care about the creator. And I saw this extremely poignant tweet recently about this. Someone said, the funniest thing about all the NFT art speculation and discussion is that no one talks about who created the NFT, who created the art for the NFT. Like, it's always the price. It's always the person who's selling it. It's never the person who actually created the physical art itself or the digital art itself, I guess. And I 100% believe that. Like, I don't know who created the weird monkey thing. If you've seen those NFTs of just like weird monkeys, like whoever created that original thing, I have no idea who it is. All I know is that everyone keeps reusing it to create their own quote unquote unique version of this thing that they can sell, whether you're Eminem or Chance the Rapper or whoever, like, who are also buying into this. But this falls into this whole idea of pump and dump, where you get a lot of people hyped up about something to throw their money at a thing, and then the person at the top just runs away. We've been seeing this with like brand new cryptocurrencies all across the United States, of like or all across the web, where influencers start to plug a specific cryptocurrency, and then once they get a bunch of people buying it, they sell all their shares, make the money, and everyone's just left with valueless cryptocurrency. You see this with NFTs as well. You get huge bidding wars of people who want to buy or sell a thing, and then they pull back on the auction, or the money just doesn't show up. It's a whole thing. And the cryptocurrency bidding wars is a whole of the discussion, but like, I just
it's so fired up. I love to see it.
I'm so all over the place with this because it makes me so frustrated, because at the end of the day, isn't this supposed to be about valuing art, right? If I know we're putting a monetary dollar value or a Ethereum value,
it's about
or
money laundering.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
But you know what? The fine art market has always had a sort of, I don't know,
corruption.
Like that's always been a component of the fine art market.
Oh yeah.
This is the point I really wanted to get to with you, like, 'cause just having you on the episode, Tia, is this isn't a new idea, right? Henry, you sound familiar with this as well. Like, this isn't a new thing to like overhype something just for the sake of selling it at auction and at extremely high prices, right?
So actually, this is to a T. And what you were talking about with like ripping off someone's art and like copies and like who owns the authentic one and blah, blah, blah. Like, there was one time in history a plot to steal the Mona Lisa and like make a bunch of forgeries and then sell all the forgeries, because anyone who bought one of the forgeries could never have it appraised or like show it to anybody. So how would they ever know that they didn't have the real one? And there's, I can't remember the name of the documentary now, but there's a really good documentary about this art forger who like donated a bunch of forgeries to all these museums, and they were authenticated and like displayed,
Yeah.
and they're not sure how to prosecute him exactly because he didn't make any money
Right.
off of it.
You're not
Sorry,
allowed to look at art again, sir.
But just
Court dismissed.
like the problem of authenticity and value and ownership and who benefits from the buying and selling of art. There was an artist in the 19th century who believed that he owned his art even after people bought it from him, and that they should give it back to him when they died or something like
Wow.
And there are a lot of art historians who look at the way that people would buy art from artists and then later on sell it for enormous profit and the artist never benefited from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
No, I mean, one of the things that I discovered, and this was thanks to my friends on Facebook, but Marley Zarcone, am I saying that last name correctly?
Shade,
Zarcone,
right? They wrote Shade, the Changing Girl.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you got it right.
Amazing artist, and she posted an article that was about the what's going on in Kazakhstan.
Yes,
and there's a whole political upheaval, and there's the government shut down the internet. And when they shut down the internet, they shut down one of the biggest Bitcoin mining farms. And that hurt the currency so bad. It's pretty interesting that your currency is dependent on if the Wi-Fi is on or not.
But also, didn't it contribute to the massive energy crisis that caused a lot of the civil unrest in Kazakhstan anyway?
Yes.
So it's just bad. It's just bad, guys.
There is a lot of moral questions you have to ask yourself. And, we have a lot of, we do a lot of compromising. I buy Starbucks cups. I have my computer plugged in longer than I probably should. I still drive a gasoline car. There's just as someone who's raised Catholic and just has all this Catholic guilt, there's just you're just always feeling guilty. And what can you feel a little more guilty,
But The Good Place, I think, addressed this really well, right?
Yes, definitely.
And so
that's what's beautiful about that show.
I know,
that show rules.
Maybe we can't structurally change the fact that we need cars and computers and all of that, but we can not create new ways to fuck everybody over.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's an article that I read recently about this, specifically around energy issues, right? Where folks have moved to New York. I don't remember if the city or if it was the state. And I'll put a link to this in the show notes where because electricity is pretty cheap in the state of New York in comparison to other places, them moving to this state to mine Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the other various cryptocurrencies drove up electricity prices to the point where it's 6 degrees here in New York or in the East Coast, and folks can't afford to keep their electricity on to keep their houses warmed. It's absurd because that's the state that we live in, where a single mined Bitcoin or single mined Ethereum coin uses the same amount of energy as your average American household uses in an entire year, right? Just to mine one of those things, and that energy usage can happen in a week. It's absurd. And that's part of the problem here is the environmental impact and the amount of electricity used to create this thing that no one is sure will be consistent or will exist in the future. And being a little bit, I think, hyperbolic when I say will it exist, clearly it will in some capacity. At this point, there's a staying power of this thing. But I don't think that what we've used cryptocurrency for, what folks have been using it for, is what was originally intended. I think the creator of Bitcoin regrets even inventing it in the first place. I think he said that publicly.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen that.
That sucks.
But if you look at the value of things, right? If we're trying to say well, how can we put the value on something of, sorry, I'm kind of meandering here, but I did want to make this point at when we were talking about value, the instability of these cryptocurrencies and therefore the value and price of these NFTs that you put on the blockchain that are only valued based on the amount of cryptocurrency that you purchase it with and sell it for varies 10 to 15% in a 2-week period. Imagine if the US dollar varied 10 to 15% over 2 weeks. The cost of goods, it's is unbelievable. It wouldn't be stable. Your grocery store would be having to change the price of like a box of Cheerios like every week by $1 or $2 up and down. It's insane. I don't know. I just like I get a little bit like lost in the sauce on all of this because there are so many things that say to me this is bad and this contributes to an overall negative impact on what I feel like the world has the potential to avoid it. Like people are choosing to do this thing because it's a get rich quick scheme, but the impact of it isn't just like monetary loss. It's like environmental impact and people putting their entire savings into this stuff that it is ultimately devastating and is impacting just beyond themselves. And that's the thing that kills me is like, this is you buying an NFT could mean that someone in upstate New York can't afford their electricity this month. Like, think about that weird fucking butterfly effect.
Exactly. I mean, that's why CGC is so big, like Jay-Z's like company bought CGC. Like they're soon going to be selling albums. I'm only speculating, but they're going to package exactly their media just like how we've been doing it. You could sell us Action Comics #1 for $3 million. There's so much like original art. There's so much like money right now in comics with it being physical or digital, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, I'm very curious, and I'm just always reading more about it and trying to figure out who's really benefiting. And it's really interesting.
Something that I think is going to become part of the conversation as this plays out a little bit more is there's almost certainly going to be a backlash against the concept of like digital authenticity. We've seen this before in history. There's a really dense book called No Place of Grace, Anti-Modernism and the Transformation of American Culture. It's by T.J. Jackson Lears. And it basically talks about like American culture at the end of the 19th century and how like elites felt very I don't know, like the like increasing capitalism and modernism like really picked up steam during that time. And there was this like inward turn back towards like medieval, like the pre-Raphaelites were part of this, right? Like, and like handicrafts and quote unquote, like authentic spiritual experience and sensory experience and all of this. And so I actually think that there will be an interesting backlash against NFTs and crypto and all of this being like existing in the digital world. And I really would caution people to learn from history, because basically what this book says is that by like the way that these people sort of rejected modernism, it sort of solidified their cultural hegemony and really left behind like working class people, poor people. Like it was basically just a movement for elites that served to kind of shore up their eliteness. And so I think, and we kind of touched on this, like Henry, you talked about being offered $10,000 to like write this book, or, and so I think that if we're going to reject NFTs and crypto and all of this, we really have to find a way to do it in a way that brings everybody with us.
Right. 100% agree. And it's not as much like I can sit here and scream into a microphone all day. Like Alex Jones gets paid way too much money to do that, right? I think there really has to be a societal, like cultural rejection of this. And I think we're seeing that in some ways. But for some reason, we're still seeing big names like Marvel and DC have all minted a shitload of different things. Like you can own original copies or digital copies of, these classic Marvel comic books or something like that. And DC's done a whole thing. Heidi McDonald over at Comics Beat wrote a wonderful article. I think it was late last year. It was titled, "I own 2 DC NFTs and this is what it feels like." And like the conclusion of her article is basically like, I don't feel like I actually own this thing. It's no different than owning a digital trading card. I can't really do anything with it, And I know there are people out there who are, maybe you're listening to this, you're probably not, who are screaming, well, people are saying that you can buy different like skins and different things for video games and you can use them across different games and stuff. Like that idea is so wonderful on paper, right? But the actual interoperability of this type of stuff is unfeasible, right? To think that you could buy a skin in Fortnite and then use it in Minecraft, or to buy a comic book on this blockchain thing and then read it in this digital comic book reader. No, nobody's doing that. We could do that without blockchain, and companies are refusing to do that already, right? There are tons and tons of opportunities of this, but to get companies like Amazon to get on board with that, to read digital comics, and Marvel and DC, and to get like, you know, Humble Bundle to create a version of something that can be read across different applications, it's tough enough as it is. Like, I can barely get a PDF reader for my digital comic books, let alone my blockchain copy of Action Comics #1 that I can read in the Comixology reader and in my PDF reader and in panels from subs. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? Like, as somebody who lives and breathes and works in technology, you have to get all these companies to agree on something, and it's just not going to happen, because like we can't even agree on DRM for getting things to work. Like, somehow the Movies Anywhere company tapped into some unknown fucking ether by signing a blank check to Amazon and Disney and everybody else out there, to say, hey, if somebody buys a movie on Apple, they can now watch it on their Roku TV for some reason, and it plays through the HBO app. I don't know how all that shit works, but somehow they made that happen, and that took literal decades to happen. If you're talking about how can I get Minecraft, owned by Microsoft, to agree with Epic Games, who also has a deal with Apple, like, you're talking incomprehensible amount of things. And we're not even talking about comic books. Like, comic books is even an even nicher experience with technology that's so bad it's a detriment to readers and creators alike. I can't even imagine someone finding a way to unify all of those systems in a digital front, let alone we can't even get the physical fucking world to agree on anything, right? Like, Diamonds falling apart, what is it, Penguin Random House is falling apart. No one can do anything right. It's making everyone's lives harder. Who is this great unifier? Bring us the savior of comics to make things work. I just don't understand it. Like, the mentality is great, and it is high reaching, and it is hopeful, but it's not there. And so we have to be realistic about this and find ways to enjoy the art that we pay for and the things that we want to have quote unquote ownership of, without destroying the fucking world through environmental impact, you know? All right, I gotta get off this soapbox. I'm melting.
That felt like
so
a
close
mic
to the
drop
sun.
in two ways, like a mic drop, but also like Mike just fell on the floor exhausted.
Like, it dropped itself.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many things that just don't work about this, and I just don't understand why people are investing in it other than to get rich quick, right? It's just a Ponzi scheme. It's just an MLM. Like, if you look beyond just the surface of it, it's so glaringly obvious. I just don't understand it. That's where my final conclusion comes down to, I guess.
Yeah, you said it.
Yep. +1.
Thank you guys so much for dealing with me on this episode. I guess, Tia, Henry, do you guys have any final thoughts, I guess, before we wrap up here?
I've said all I can say.
Thank you.
Decolonize comics.
Fuck
yeah.
yes. Absolutely. Well, I guess before we go then, Henry, where can people find you on the internet? Where can they read your comic books? What do you have going on?
I'm very lucky that I was on NPR's All Things Considered.
Whoa.
This last Monday. So please look that up. Producer Janaki Mehta and Mia were really cool, and they just did this really, they made this really possible. And the coverage had led the book to being a Amazon bestseller for Image Comics category in the third and fourth slot, or fourth and fifth slot. So, but I hope people are able to support my comics through their comic book shops and or local bookstores or libraries. You can find me at all those places. And but yeah, I'm Henry Barajas on Twitter, Henry J. Barajas on Instagram. And don't go to Facebook, because I'm never there unless I'm asking about NFTs.
That's the best place to have that conversation, I guess.
Yeah, if you want to talk about NFTs, go to Facebook.
Yeah,
wear a hard hat.
Yeah, that's great. Well, next week's show is going to be, like I said at the top of the episode, me, Karen, Nick, and Paul. It's our annual number 7. If you want to send us an email or send us a voicemail for the episode, tell us about your favorite bits of the last year of I Read Comic Books, or ask us a question. Anything and pretty much everything goes. So send it over to us at IRCB ircbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you guys. We really, really would. And make sure you fill out the listener survey, bit.ly/IRCB2022. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. You can follow Tia at Portrait of Madame X, spelled the fun French way. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at IRCB Podcast.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. You can join at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show, Gorgeous, Gorgeous Girls, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, because we deserve it. We are spectacular.
Join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and listen to our episodes live as we record every week, just like today's episode. There's a link to our Discord in the show notes. Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends and family in your local comic shop about IRCB? We'd really appreciate that. That word of mouth goes pretty far. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander is a very cool guy who edits our show and makes us sound fantastic every single week. I want to say thank you to Henry and Tia for being on this episode. Thank you to everyone who hung out with us in the Discord channel. You guys are wonderful human beings. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.